Hello and welcome to the final panel of this year's Night of Ideas. My name is Dennis Harvey and I'll be moderating this discussion on representations of migrants and migration on screen. So with me for the next hour and a half are the film practitioners Dominik Moll, Dina Afkhampour, Erol Mintas and Saleh Jamal Eddin. So you're all very welcome and I'm delighted you could join us for the evening. My name is Dennis Harvey. I'm a filmmaker from Dublin in Ireland. And my background is mainly in academic film studies. And I moved to Stockholm in 2017 to pursue a master's in cinema studies at Stockholm University. In my film practice and my studies, I focus on the personal politics of movement and migration. And that was what brought me into contact with Noncitizen in early 2018. And I've been lucky enough to be working with them ever since. And I think it's important to say my personal stake in the politics of migration is that as a privileged migrant, I've benefited greatly from free movement and frictionless movement. And I think that's something that should be granted to all and not just those who are already privileged. So Noncitizen was formed in 2015 when a group of filmmakers in Stockholm came together to put more focus on the issues that they were raising in their films rather than the process of making the films. And so the issues that they were raising were things like freedom of movement, borders, everyone's right to their human rights. And in the first few years, we organized various events just to try to focus on these issues. We had a symposium on filmmaking in exile, which Saleh actually participated in. We had dinners focusing on things like the abolishment of citizenship, and then screenings and seminars about filmmaking as activism. And then for the last number of years, we focused mainly on two projects, which I've worked closely on. The first one is called Noncitizen Archive. And if I'm going to share my screen so you can see it at home. So Noncitizen Archive is a user-generated online repository for audiovisual material which depicts migration in different forms. Because we believe that images created by migrants and people on the move are some of the most crucial documents of our time, but these often get lost due to the precarious situation of many migrants. But through Noncitizen Archive, we hope to preserve these images for the future. So please do feel free to visit it. It's noncitizenarchive.com. We're still in the process of building it, but there is interesting material on there already. And then the other project that we ran was called Noncitizen Camera, which was an 18-month filmmaking mentorship program for those with migratory backgrounds. And we ran it in both Stockholm and Gothenburg. Our primary aim was to sort of create a safe and supportive social space where film was in focus. And it was targeted towards people who were living undocumented or had come through the asylum process or just had experienced migration in some form. So we had funding from the Swedish Postcode Lottery Foundation, and we had provided all the technical and artistic sort of instruction that was needed to create a film, to start a film practice, as well as the equipment needed. But one of the sort of, I think, crucial parts of the project was that there was no pressure on participants to produce anything. It was open for just a social space where you could talk about film or watch films or just meet other people. And so loads of people came for just the social side. At the same time, loads of people came and produced amazing films. And we had this time last year in Mångkulturellt centrum. We had a brilliant discussion and screening when you could do those sort of things in real life. And then once the pandemic started, we had another screening, like an online mini film festival. You can see both of those events. They're recorded there on our Facebook page, the Noncitizen Facebook page. So I'd recommend everyone to go over there and have a look later on. But that's enough for me for now. I think it's time for our panel to introduce themselves. So I'll hand the webcam to you, Dominik Moll.
Hi, thank you, Dennis. So my name is Dominik Moll. I'm a French-German filmmaker, but working mostly in France. I've been doing mainly feature films for the movie theaters. And 3 years ago, I was asked by the French-German TV broadcaster Arte to work on a mini-series, 6 episodes on the issue of the refugees, and it was a series that had already been partly developed by a German director, but then he had left, and so I was supposed to pick up and to finish the writing and to direct it. And what I found, what had been done, I was not very happy with it because I felt that it lacked documentation and that it was a bit caricature-like. I mean, for instance, all Greek characters were fascists from Greek dawn, and everything was a bit overdrawn. So I felt that we really had to do quite some work on the developing of the stories. And yeah, one thing I forgot to say was that I wasn't when they offered me this job, I felt a bit nervous first because it was the first time that I tackled such an important topic, and I, of course, you're always afraid that you're not going to, you know, be up to the subject, and I felt how can you really tell interesting stories that will bring this problem closer to the audiences, and I felt that the best way to do it was to tell individual stories and to show that this, because in the news often you talk about the refugees or the migrants or the asylum seekers, and it's some kind of anonymous mass, and which can be frightening for somebody who's sitting at home and feels like his country is going to be invaded by foreigners who will take their jobs and their welfare, etc. And I felt that if you tell individual stories, if you give faces to those people, and so that people can, viewers can represent them as individual and not as an anonymous mass, that's a way of bringing them closer to a European audience. And so that's what we did, and we developed different strings of narrations, not only refugees or migrants, but also people in Europe, be it in Greece, Germany, or France, who are in contact with them. There's one story of a businesswoman who is trying to privately run a camp, a refugee camp in Greece, and actually make a business out of it, but tries to combine some more human approach, but still with the idea of making money. There's a Nigerian asylum seeker and his brother who are in this Greek camp, and whose dream is to go to England. So it will follow his efforts to cross all those frontiers to get to England. We have 2 Greek security guards who work in that camp, and who will also be involved with the death of one of the refugees. And we felt that it was important to have those Greek characters in order to show that there are people in Europe, of course, who also have a hard time of making ends meet, and who are in difficult situations, and not to have a black and white picture of the refugees who are poor and have problems, and all Europeans are rich and well off. So to find a balance within that. And then we had a story of a German family who takes in a young Syrian refugee and see how that works, what tensions will come from this situation. And then we also had the story of a Syrian family who arrives in Paris and who tries to start a new life there. And all those stories are connected in a way. And yeah, so and we shot the film in different countries, in Greece, in Germany, and in France, and it was shot in different languages, because the idea was that all the characters should speak their own language. The Greeks speak Greek, and the Syrians speak Arabic, and etc., etc. And also one thing that was important for me was that especially the Syrian characters, who are often in fiction, in France at least, played by either North African actors or Lebanese actors, that they should really be played by Syrian actors. And so we actually found Syrian actors who had fled Syria and who were living in exile in France.
My name is Dina Afkhampour. I am the director of Cinema Africa Film Festival, the largest African film festival in Northern Europe. I'm on sabbatical currently, so it's I'm at the moment sitting in South Africa on a diplomatic assignment via my husband. So I wanted to, unlike the rest of the panelists, I'm not a filmmaker and I'm not a scholar, but I've had the great fortune of watching a lot of amazing, outstanding films from the African continent about forced migration, and I wanted to share two of them with you. The first one is An Opera of the World by Manthia Diawara, and the second one is called After Migration, Calabria, Italy by Wale Oyejide. So I'll just introduce them briefly and then we can see some clips. An Opera of the World by Malian scholar and filmmaker Manthia Diawara takes as its starting point the Sahel opera Bintu Were, the story of a young pregnant woman who sees no future for herself and her unborn child in Mali and would like to give birth in Europe to secure a better life, quote unquote. The opera traces her inward and physical journey. Between scenes from a performance of Bintu Were, Diawara includes discussion about opera as an art form, its accessibility, its ability to punctuate deep emotion, which is shared by many cultures where song is used to mark important events, and its porousness in accepting new influences from outside, a metaphor for yet another border or boundary to be questioned and transgressed. Based on Edward Glissant's concept of chaos opera, where din is discourse, meaning where diverse voices and elements are encouraged to keep their opacity or uniqueness without the pressure to harmonize or integrate, while still relating to one another. Chaos opera asks, how may this kind of friction reveal connections between people and relationships and possibly give way to new entities of a higher order? Diawara draws on the knowledge of writers and philosophers from around the globe, such as Alexander Kluge and Fatou Diom, who offer their personal responses to forced migration and history. Forced migration has always existed, and to take from Immanuel Kant, who Kluge mentions, we are all guests on this planet, and we must put into practice a radical hospitality and acceptance of our fellow guests. If not for the sake of moral correctness, then for the sake not to become, as Glissant says, defenders of borders who are in actuality defending the old world, the past, who have no imagination for the future.
I am Erol Mintas, filmmaker. I'm Kurdish, citizen of Turkey. I studied first computer science and then studied filmmaking. Now I'm continuing my professional life as a filmmaker. I can first tell you maybe a little bit about before 2017, what I have done as a filmmaker. Then after 2017, because then I moved to Finland. At the moment, I continue working and live in Finland. I think I can share yeah. So, of course, coming from a Kurdish background in Turkey, since our childhood, the assimilation actively has been in our life, and we try to find our own ways to struggle with that, and then find our new ways to how to keep our language alive, and how to keep our cultural and historical values alive. So, while I was studying the computer science, then cinema and filmmaking urged itself in my life in different forms. Then I start to make film because also mostly was coming from a need that when you look at in the Turkish cinema history, Kurdish people, how they portrayed as like stereotypes, and as we can nowadays see many mobile people, how they portrayed in most of the European films and Americans also. So as an active action that we said, okay, if we don't tell our stories, then nobody can tell our stories as we are, because everybody trying to push us in some certain frames, and they want to see things with some certain lenses. So instead of like waiting for someone to give us space, then we basically take the action and we take the space to create our film.
My name is Saleh Jamal Eddin. I am a Syrian film director. I have not become Swedish yet, but I hope I become soon. I study in Syria business administration and film, and I started with the drama series in Syria. I worked 3 years there, and then because of the war, I was forced to leave my country, and I went to Egypt. I worked there as a TV director for also around 3 years, and then I decided after also the situation where they're not so good for refugees, so I decided to move to Europe. I took the way like any refugees. I crossed the sea to Greekland, to Greece, and then all the way to Sweden. I came here 2015, and since that time I work about my documentary that has had many names actually, and it's long story. I can explain it later. But in 2018, I opened my production company, and I decided it's time to produce my first long film in Sweden. And I produced and directed my first long film in Sweden that has called Ahmed Maryam. And it was a good experience for me. I learned more about the production here in Europe. As I told you, since I decided to move to Europe or to Sweden, I decided to document my trip, my journey from Turkey to Sweden, and I'm working about a documentary film that telling my story and how this life or how this time was and how I had to try find a place here in Sweden.
That sort of brings us back. I think having your film start almost in the exact same way as Dominik's, as Eden starts, is incredibly powerful, that we have sort of the two sides. You know, like that. Yeah, in Eden, we're looking from outside the boat on the beach, and then in your film, we're inside the boat. And Dominik, I think that sort of tees up something I'd like to talk to you about, because I remember you said that you wanted, when you had the screenplay for Eden, that you worked with it, you workshopped it with Syrian actors to sort of bring in their own experiences, and I think, yeah, seeing Saleh's film sort of shows the importance of something like that. And did you find that the Syrian actors who did they sort of teach you something about how you saw migration, or sort of what did they add to the screenplay and to the depiction of migration that you tried to?
Well, they taught me about their personal experiences mainly, and of course it's not the same when you see it from outside or you hear it in the news than when you have one of the Syrian actors, whose name is Jalal Altawil. When he told us about, because he was really at the forefront of the revolution in Syria, and he was quite a well-known actor there, and so he got jailed twice, he got tortured, and then he was liberated, but he had to make a public appearance on television and say that it was the Syrian Liberation Army who had kidnapped him and tortured him, and when he tells you about all the tortures and how he spent weeks in a 1 square meter cage with 10 other prisoners, and it just when you hear it directly from someone who has lived it, of course it gives you a whole different perspective on things, and suddenly of course your own problems seem very small, and it was important for us to have this input from the Syrian actors, and actually we did some of it, we did build it into the screenplay, and Jalal at one point is talking to another characters and talking about torture, and actually showing his real scars that are real scars from the torture, and so of course it gives it more reality and authenticity. So that was really important to us, and of course I learned a lot, because it just brings you everything much closer.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that we chose these films obviously because they were strong and they broke the stereotypes basically. And they used the different art forms to sort of add another layer or expression or a new language to the journeys of migration, which I think is really interesting through opera and then through fashion. And then the fact that, as you saw in the first clip, the Senegalese French author Fatou Diom, she talks about this hopefulness or this idea of being reborn, that migration is sort of this, and Edward Glissant also talks about this, that there's this spark of wanting to be sort of born to your own will. The first time you were born was out of your own will in some sense. And I think that's a very powerful and beautiful image. And the fact that it's a timeless and eternal story, even within this, the films and in this panel, that there's migration story after migration story. My own family that was forced to migrate to evade religious persecution in Iran. I was a child on a motorcycle through Balochistan to Pakistan and then to the United States. It's a sense of history and time.
If you don't have like support, if you don't have money, you can't like really introduce your work in good way. As what happened with me with my first film, Mariam. I took loan to produce this film, and then took loan to distribute the film. And after I did all job and sent the film to many festival, and I won many prize. Swedish Film Institute says, okay, you can get some support for this to distribute the film. It was nice, like they give me a chance to say and show my work, but we actually, there is a question, a lot of questions in the film where I would like to ask people who like make the decision. We came here because I came here because I believe there is justice. There is balance between people. We ask like to give us chance, people who come from different culture, they have different background, they see cinema and film in different eyes. We have our voice, our stories. We need to say that, and we need like support. In the beginning, I wasn't asking about. I need like just to learn about community, about culture, about how this country work. I didn't thought about the money. I didn't want money, but it's difficult to continue like that because I eat from this business. Understand me? I don't have another work. I am like I work 100% about that. So if I want to make film and I want like to, from the first production, from the first like step in making a film to the ending, I will work alone. It will be difficult, and I can't make the professional work that they ask me about it because I am alone. And if you want to ask people to work with you, people want money, so they leave you alone, and no one listen to you. All the time there is more important stories. And in the end, I decided I will make my film and let people to decide, is that really where project in the last 5 years more important more than story. So I'm not afraid to say what's happened with me. I will talk about all the steps I tried, and as I told you, my film not only pain and sadness, and my film has a lot of changing, and myself, I changed a lot since I came to Sweden.
Yeah, it's well, maybe you can establish one.
Yes.
And then yeah, Dina, that brings me on to you. I think what could you talk to us a little bit of why you found it important to establish something like Cinema Africa in Sweden and the Nordic region?
Well, first I'd like to say that I wasn't the person that established it. It's over 20 years old, so it's about, I think, 23 years now. And it was established by Swedish nurses who had gone to West Africa and had really seen that there was a cultural gap in Sweden and a sort of lack of awareness about African cultures and people. And they came back and started the nonprofit organization as well as the film festival, and it's been steadily growing. I think that was the roots, but now I think it's very important because as Afro-Swedes have consolidated their political voice in the last 5 years, I would say, and become more and more visible, it's become apparent that there is such a lack of representation, especially in film and in culture overall. And I think that we have a long ways to go when it comes to establishing an Afro-Swedish, like a larger Afro-Swedish film community. There just isn't that much support as of yet. So I think that the festival plays a very crucial part in showcasing the talent that's in Sweden. And then I also think that it's sort of a bridge between the continent and North Europe. And it sort of, you know, has the ability to bring different parts of society together and generate lots of conversation. Every year we've had a very strong section on movements and migrations, and the films just get better and better. And I think that, you know, there's an opportunity for co-productions, obviously, with France and Germany and Italy. There's a large African population, obviously, in Italy. So, you know, the stories are just becoming, we highlight the stories through our festival, but I think that in general, there's just been more of an appetite, if I can say, for seeing these kinds of films.
I would just like to sort of finish on a more serious note that I think, this is me personally speaking here, but I think the contemporary politics of movement is broken, and that people are regularly deported from peaceful, resource-rich countries to unstable territories where their lives are put back in danger. And at the same time, those in search of sanctuary are forced into ever more treacherous routes to try to find safety, like we've seen in Saleh's film tonight. And so we need freedom of movement for all, and I think we need it now. But there's hope, and I get a lot of hope from discussions and events like this tonight. And as Stuart Hall so rightly pointed out, the culture is always being negotiated and reflected, and it's contested, and it's sometimes bitterly fought over. So I want to thank Dominik, Dina, Erol, and Saleh for fighting the good fight, and to try to move cultural representation of migration in the right direction and towards a more humane politics of movement. And I want to thank Mångkulturellt Centrum in Stockholm and the Goethe Institut, and especially Lara at the French Institute for all their help in giving us the platform to discuss this tonight. So thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves and take care of those around you, and have a good continued evening.